Greetings and salutations, travelers. Welcome back to the Inn of Planar Crossroads, and as always, welcome back to our Around the Hearth discussions. This time, we're on the final chat of Sci-Fi July, and it is the space opera. So, that's what we're going to cover this time. Let me see. We'll do announcements and a quick spotlight, and we'll get right into the discussion. So, I'm Adam L. Spain with the Inn of Planar Crossroads. We hope you've been enjoying these themed months. We hope that you've kind of checked out our rudimentary webpage and saw how you could support us on Patreon, Subscribestar, Locals, or PayPal Direct if you want to do that. Direct pay through PayPal or something like that. Or you can contact us. That's also an option. We're trying to get to $100 a month of support, financial support, so that we can make this content and devote more time to it in a responsible manner. So there we go. That's mainly what I've got. Let's see. We will go clockwise from me, so we'll do Scrat, then Josh, then Dan. So, Scrat is next.
Yeah. I'm Scrat from Squirrel Plays over on YouTube. We talk about writing in the sense of character building, world building, and then a little bit about the actual story itself. And that can be for TTRPGs or your own book if you're working on that kind of thing, or movie script, whatever floats your boat. And we also like to share and explore the creations that the community makes too, and get them out there and pull them out of their little hidey holes. And that's it.
Uh-huh.
All right. And I am Josh from Copper Dragon Games. Short intro here. You can find me over on YouTube or copperdragongames.com. And I don't have any big announcements right now. So we're on to the next person.
That's me, Dan from Avenue Studios. Hello, everyone. You can find us on YouTube, Rumble, and anywhere you listen to podcasts. And most importantly of all, we live stream Wednesdays, 9 p.m. Eastern. And for 2 of those live streams each month, it's coordinated with these collaborations in the themed months where we build a one-shot and then we play test it with some of our supporters as the players, taking some of the concepts we talk about here on Adam's channel and incorporating them into the one-shot. Of course, a shout out to Mr. Moral Compass, one of our supporters, who's going to be running the live game for Sci-Fi July. And he, as always, wants me to shout out After Quest, a show he is in on our channel as well, with my wife and his wife, who are beautiful and amazing beyond anything we are worthy of. So check us out over there at the Forest Family Avenue Studios. And thank you, Adam, for bringing us all together.
Mm-hmm. Okie dokie. Means we're on to Levi's spotlight.
Yep. I am shouting out Okayest DM. They talk general TTRPG stuff, have went over some 5e things, are currently working on their Sagas system, a setting agnostic TTRPG system. Go check them out.
All right. There we go. So, that's everything we need to cover before we start chatting, travelers, which means please join us. Pull a seat up by the hearth, grab your preferred beverage, and discuss and listen with us as we discuss, and you can discuss with us in the comments, the space opera. So, let's get into this. All right. So, I made some notes for the space opera because this is the one that you're going to see a lot of things fall into that have been popular in the past, like Star Wars, because we've mentioned Star Wars coming through this. And Star Wars, at least the stories that have been told through the fourth, fifth, and sixth films chronologically in the series, they were very much a big opera. And you can include like the prequels with that too, leading up into that opera. And I think that has really flavored the way people think about space operas, but it's not necessarily how the space opera has to go. We have, of course, Star Wars, but then there's also, I'm going to lose Josh here again because I'm referencing anime, but there's the Battleship Yamato. It's an old space opera anime. Legend of Galactic Heroes from a similar time period. You look at those. And a lot of the classic pulp sci-fi ends up falling kind of into that, but especially when you look at Isaac Asimov's The Foundation trilogy, it's very much a space opera type of thing happening, because it's literally recording a galactic empire's progress. So we have a lot of references for it, even when we don't realize it. And I would even kind of term, in a certain way, 2001: A Space Odyssey as a kind of space opera. Just a more personal one. So, what are y'all thinking about the space opera? I probably shouldn't reserve the space opera for the last chat of the night. These guys get tired at this time.
Star Wars is the only one I know. I didn't know any of those other ones you listed. Well, except I guess Space Odyssey, but I didn't know the animes.
Yeah, what are the? Because I was actually looking at it too and seeing, what do they label? What's like your basic Google Foo get you for space opera definitions? Because I wasn't sure. Dune pops up,
right?
But
it would technically be one, because it plays. There's usually the involvement in an opera in general. There's usually involvement of a very dramatic story. It can be personal, or it can be large. Like you can play out. To reference our last chat, you can play out Hamlet as an opera if you want to.
Ooh,
it's technically it's technically not termed as an opera, I don't think, because there's no singing.
Hamlet is.
Yeah, it's not. But
there you go.
Well, and space opera, at least according to Wikipedia, also in part comes from soap opera.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, it is like a bombastic and dramatic, I think would be some important words.
High drama, yes. High drama.
Right.
When you said it came from soap operas, I thought to myself, oh, that fits perfect for our alien chat when humans were sleeping with everybody.
Yeah.
And in soap operas, everybody sleeps with everybody. It's like, no, it can't be that right. It can't be.
Well, because it's got to be dramatic. And it's like, I don't know what other drama to throw in.
Dang human horn dogs.
Yeah.
So ironically, if you look up space opera definition in Google and you look at the Oxford languages, the result, the part where it's like, use this in a sentence? Their sentence is, I associate the idea of space opera with appallingly bad writing.
Whose quote is that?
Makes me think, clearly this is associated with soap operas, right? Like, that is...
I don't think that's very fair to Isaac Asimov.
Yeah. But there is a difference between it is often, like, horror is something that you can find a lot of really bad movies in. It's not all horror, right? Like, there's an association because it's easy to relatively cheaply do horror, and you don't really need, like, big name people to sell the concepts of a horror thing as much. But that doesn't make horror a genre that will be bad, even though it is often associated with bad.
I think there's also the distinction between, like, a work that is technically poor writing, poorly written, but that is still immensely entertaining.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, there are. I mean, that's kind of where we get a lot of cult classics, right? Like
Yes.
you could see this movie and just be like, "Oh, this is a train wreck,"
Trolls 2.
and yet I'm still enjoying it. It's anyway. I feel like I derailed this with that
Yeah. Though
sample
I think
sentence.
That's 100%.
I should say that the thing about that is in a TTRPG setting, even if your plot doesn't make sense, but you're having enough fun stuff rolling around, you can be a cult classic.
Yeah.
Right.
So
That
true.
campaign may get talked about for decades because of the random time. It's like, we were going and we were like repairing our ship, but then we crash landed into like someone else's star battle.
Yes.
I mean,
And that small core group of fans is gonna just be hardcore fans of that fiction forever.
Yeah.
Yes. I was reading all this stuff and listening to you guys talk. It's like space opera is so well set up to be an RPG setting.
Mhm.
Like I
space
feel
warfare, melodramatic, chivalric romance,
yeah,
bad script. We
I
got this,
honestly
guys.
feel
All
like
on improv.
yeah, a lot of Sci-Fantasy TTRPG is gonna, especially if you're going past the first couple levels,
Mhm.
right? Like the farther level you go, the broader scope, the more dramatic each thing has to be for it to be still interesting in this campaign you've been in. It will eventually space opera if it does not start there.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. I think if you're playing sci-fi in an RPG, at some point you're gonna find yourself in a space opera, whether you meant to be there or not.
Mm.
Like it tends to evolve into that. Yeah.
Well, I was thinking when you guys are saying that too, especially Levi saying you have to escalate it, but then if you run a game through the whole length of all the levels and you get to your high level play, I just shout out to our Adam and I's discussions with Zechariah about high level play. We're bringing it back around to the personal and the intimate, because at the high level play, the characters, it's a struggle to create monsters that are to have a weight. For a very shortened version of our discussions there, to have weight in the combats and the troubles, because the characters are so capable. So you bring it back to those personal moments and those personal stories and the threats to those personal things. It does create this beautiful storyline if you play it well, of starting low and small, growing into this escalation, into those epic space battles, and then all those romantic and friendship relationships you've created, and then at the end you got to bring it back to those are the things that are threatened when the world is at stake. Which also shout out to our Western stories about bringing it back to the personal stories too.
and
It totally is, and we are terrible. Well, I'm terrible at ad-libbing lines, so they're all going to be cheesy soap opera. Yeah.
well, I mean,
A little melodramatic.
there's video evidence
hours
on
of
it. So, but to touch in on that, 2 points. One to touch in on that is that as they get stronger, just to help people work through that idea of taking someone from low to high level, especially in this type of a story, in this space opera of a story where it is dramatic, it's highly dramatic, and it's usually played straight. I don't know that you could play a space opera not straight. The players don't have to be playing it straight. They can be laughing their butts off at all these highly dramatic situations that these people are placed in with these aliens or whatever.
Right, but you mean the characters taking it
The
very
character
seriously.
is very much taking this seriously. Not that there can't be comic relief, but that the overall idea is this character's taking this very seriously. It's lonely at the top. Who else is going to be as strong as this person? Not very many people. And most of the people that are going to be as strong as this high-level individual probably are very motivated to have his power or her power. they're not your friends. Now you may have friends, but now they need you to protect them because now you're a liability to them. Because they're just a way to get to you. And that was what we kind of touched on with our high-level play. It's lonely at the top. So that can build into this idea of, I get the vision of this lowly nerf herder or whatever growing up and eventually growing in power and becoming maybe involved in the military, the intergalactic military. And then he rises through the ranks of that. And eventually he's risen to the ranks and is married and become the emperor of this particular galaxy, like you see in Dune, kind of mixing the two metaphors here.
Nice.
But at the top, there's no one there for him. He is at the top. That's the pinnacle. What's he going to do there? The burden of power type of thing. You can work with that. You can kind of... That plays in well to a space opera. Now, if you want a more personal space opera, you would kind of just crank up the Firefly type of stuff. Actually, no. I'm not going to use Firefly. I'm going to use something we haven't yet because I meant to. Farscape.
I was thinking Farscape.
Farscape actually would fall into the idea of a personal space opera. Because all the stories are very personal, but they have ramifications for a lot of people, especially there at the end with the final wrap-up movie.
Mm-hmm.
It presents you with this story of just a single crew that changes the way the entire interstellar universe works. And it can be really fun to play through that. And I guess that would be a space opera that would kind of disprove the idea that they got to... Well, everybody was technically playing it straight. But
yeah,
we were laughing at it. So they technically were playing it straight. The characters were straight in their ideas in it. So my point still stands, but we can laugh our butts off at it because Rigel is not a very serious character. But we like to laugh at Rigel.
But he has that great moment with the stick.
Stick. So there you go. I guess there are options in there for you. Lots of media that you can look at. And don't believe all the definitions because they're not always right. You can help refine that as we go on through life. So that's the space opera stuff there and recommendations. Let me make sure I got my notes here.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said Farscape because I was thinking about it too. Definitely not melodramatic and cheesy. Definitely not.
No, there's nothing cheesy about Farscape. What are you talking about?
I've never seen a single episode. Do I need to go back and find this?
You deserve it to yourself to at least watch some of it. There's lots of aliens. And the Jim Henson Company did the puppetry. So it is top-notch puppetry.
All right.
It's fascinating.
Is Farscape the one that has the two actors they used at the end of Stargate? The later seasons?
And when she's pitching the different ideas to the one dude for movie ideas, one of them is Farscape.
Yeah,
it's literally Farscape.
That for me, maybe this is the comment for the thing. That was a nerdgasm for me when that happened. I'm watching Stargate and I recognize
That's the comment. Dan's nerdgasm.
Dan's nerdgasm. I was like, because they kept cutting, and then it was Farscape, and they went all out, did all the costumes. The set was perfect. I was like, there's only going to be a fraction of the people that recognize this.
Yep.
Yeah, 100%.
I do think Farscape is a good one to look at if you're wanting to do a space opera that you're not going to get depressed by.
Yeah.
Now, if you want something more serious, you can go to the other things I talked about, but,
If those two are in that, and that's a space opera, does that make Stargate a space opera?
I was just thinking that.
I don't know. There is a kind of end point to Farscape. There's a culmination of this long-term problem, and I guess that's one of the things you need to look at for a space opera. There needs to be a long-term problem, because an opera is grand and big. You need to look at, well, what is the long-term problem that's being solved? Because there is one in Farscape. It's even in the first season that does get eventually resolved. I don't know that Stargate has one.
Stargate Atlantis had more of an end goal, and then Stargate kind of had this just on, hey, we can run this show forever, and then they realized they couldn't, and we're like, okay, here's this big bad guy. Go after it.
Yeah. So, is the end goal more important, or the dramatic feel?
It depends if you're going for a tragedy or not.
Well, like, I think... So, one of the things with a lot of these genres is that genres bleed.
Mm-hmm. If you cut them.
So, I mean that genres bleed into each other, just naturally. They're not, like, hard and fast lines. All genres are ring species, to bring up an earlier discussion point. But... So, I never, was able to sit down and just watch all of Stargate, but I saw various episodes throughout time. And there were more tame, but also more large and dramatic feeling ones. So I feel like at times it felt space opera-y more than others. So maybe it's more fringe than some others in how space opera it is, but not out of there. But it's also, something I watched over a decade ago sporadically. So, my exact memory of how space opera-y it is hazy.
I think that's a fair point, too. And Scrat kind of pointed it out with they tried to extend it indefinitely, and then you lose those character stories that you were following. You know, you kind of wrap them up, but the show keeps going. It's the problem with TV shows.
Yeah, I think that one in particular, if I remember correctly, had this really big pain point with, they thought they were getting canceled, so they'd try to do an ending point, but then they'd find out they got renewed, so then they got to figure out how to extend it for another season. Multiple times they went through that process.
Yeah, Sci-Fi Channel was bad about that.
Yeah, and that happens with their characters, too. They'll write one out, kill them or whatever, and then all the fans are like, please don't do that, and then they bring him back. I was like, oh, he's not dead, here's a clone, or, we copied him.
That sounds very soap opera.
Fair enough.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, that's kind of an unfair comparison for a space opera and a soap opera, because if it was true that they're supposed to behave like soap operas, no one would die forever. They'd all be alive. Yeah. Everybody would live in some way, form, or fashion, and until the actor dies, and then they write him off. But they've been killing off a few people lately. But the idea of it's a loose connection for the soap opera and space opera nowadays. Maybe when the definition was kind of first being thrown around, it's kind of like saying a pulp sci-fi versus a real sci-fi. But nowadays, if you say a space opera, people are expecting something with grand stakes. They're expecting something big scale. They're expecting Star Wars, Starship Yamada, or Legend of Galactic Heroes, and stuff like that. They're expecting those big stories, politics, interpersonal drama, figuring out who's going to backstab who. It's very much like Game of Thrones gets referenced a lot, but it's really a lot more like real world problems placed into a sci-fi setting and then cranking up the drama on it, cranking up the melodrama on it.
Now, feel free to challenge me on this. I'm just
You're challenged.
out loud.
No,
Challenge accepted.
Glove slap. The idea that the space warfare, the big and epic story is for a space opera is more of a backdrop and setting, and it's the melodrama and the romance of the character stories with that as a backdrop and setting that makes it a space opera.
I think that's pretty fair, because we're using romance in the classical sense, I am assuming, of definition.
Yeah, you could also do it friendship wise, but chivalric, any kind of romance, the connections with the characters and expounding on that, which brings in that soap opera element of the very personal stories and the interactions between very specific characters. But it needs that setting like Star Wars of the grandiose. Because really in Star Wars, we're not really concerned. The rebels and the Empire fighting against each other is the backdrop. The real story is Luke and Darth Vader and Leia and Han Solo. Those are the stories we're really following.
Those high drama, intense stories.
Right.
Mm. And then all the other conflict is only facilitating the telling of that story.
Right.
You see this a lot in things that are converted into operas, stories that are converted into operas. There's this big thing happening, and you're following someone who's in that situation, and this big thing happening. And it can make for a lot of... This is something that can be unique to your characters, too. So, one of the players may be playing a character that is very space opera-y, and one may not. That's actually okay, because this happens in games anyway, where one character is kind of going to be the main character with quotes in a game for a little bit, because this particular story beat is about them. So that's not a bad thing. If you actually have someone who maybe they're an exiled ruler who is trying to hide, they're the son, the true ruler that is supposed to rise up, and he's trying to understand how he's supposed to do that and reclaim his throne. But he's stuck with all these nincompoops he found at the local cantina. So that's okay, because you let his be the last one, is what you would end up doing. You have his reveal, not necessarily his reveal to the party, but his reveal to the grander world, be that final epitaph of the story. And this is something you can kind of discuss at session 0, but usually it ends up coming around organically. And it doesn't have to be the last one, it's just usually well suited for the last crescendo of the story. So it can work depending on how your players want to play it. And a lot of this is assuming you're going to have a big, long campaign. This is a point to bring up. If you're going to do a space opera in a TTRPG, it's going to be a campaign. It's not going to be a one-shot. You're not going to do this in a one-shot.
Do it, yeah.
I have a snapshot from an existing otherwise
right
space opera, and it's like, here's one scene in the middle of that.
So,
but that's different.
Interesting challenge.
Well, I think a way you could do it as one-shots is just to space the one-shots out. So maybe this is... So you play this particular episode of this space opera idea you have as a one-shot or a little bit of a sum-shot, 2 or 3, 1 to 3 sessions. And then you go on and you do your normal game. And then maybe you schedule it out to do it a few months later. You do this sum-shot again and you pick up the story and you keep going. That's a way you can do it.
Maybe do the Star Wars thing with the hey, here's the stuff that happened in the middle. Here's the next dramatic scene you guys are going to for your next one shot.
You play the Star Wars movie, music, as you do literally hold up
radio
a thing.
Voice.
You literally hold up the printout for your players and scroll it up on purpose.
So there is very much this, you need that investment in these character stories. Because I do know, I think with certain groups, like I know the group of players that I have, my friends who I've been playing with for years, we could do that in a one shot. But it's only because we tend to be heavy roleplay types, and so they can make up 5 minutes before the backstory and they're emotionally invested, and they've simulated in their brains decades of time with each other as characters, and they can just pull that out because they enjoy doing that. So you need that emotional weight, you need that emotional investment in the melodrama to really pull out that operatic feel to it, I think.
Mm-hmm. I think you could also do it for a space opera if you did make it, and one of the players were supposed to rise up to max level, is what you guys were thinking about doing, or at least high level. Because combat does come up in these stories, you're going to end up stretching out the story. So doing it in 2 hours, even 4 hours, would be difficult, because if you have 2 hours of combat, you don't usually get very far story-wise in 2 hours of combat, but you get enough of a ways there for a one-shot. If you do that and you kind of stretch it out over multiple sessions, what you end up doing is letting the other players also have those moments, along with this person that's going to be ascending to a throne, or this small set of the people that are going to be ascending, or maybe they're a group of exiled nobles that are trying to do it. All of this assumes that type of thing. So you do have options to do it, even with multiple people being not a chosen one necessarily, but someone very important in a larger scale than just what they are, or perhaps becoming more important. So, also think about your alien societies, because you're going to be involving different politics with this. So if you have 2 different societies here, we'll go back to those hierarchy of needs, and when you're working out those hierarchy of needs, those alien societies will have a different hierarchy, and so negotiations would be different with them. And it's okay to have, I guess this is a co-point to something we did before with communication with alien races. If you have alien races in your campaign, don't be afraid for there to be a universal language, or at least some kind of universal translator, because especially in these very dramatic moments, you don't want to screw that up just because someone says something weird that would be taken wrong in that language, when it literally means the death of characters that you're trying to work with here. And frankly, politicians understand that. It is rare for politicians to get really bent out of shape out of something as simple as a small, innocuous faux pas culturally. You usually have to do something very bad culturally to have that faux pas be a detriment to the negotiations. So just bear that in mind when you're doing this, especially dramatic stuff.
I'm just picturing a alien them's fighting words. Breakdown in communications. War!
Yeah. Yeah, warlike races do not particularly work well in real life, but they could work in your setting. So
I was gonna say that could make a good backdrop for your space opera. That's how it all started.
well, wars
We
have
made a
One
started.
guy shook a
joke during
hand
first
and-
contact, and
Yep.
then it was all downhill from there.
300 years later, Romeo and Juliet, go.
Romeo and Juliet. One of them's a human and one of them's not. That's just how it has to be.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, there they go.
There those humans go again. The humans are like, make love, not war, man.
Look, it didn't mean with everybody.
They're like, come on.
That's how we got this war in the first
One guy in the
place.
back. I did.
All right.
Oh, man.
Let's wrap it up then, gents. We'll work on final
Right.
thoughts. So let me see. I don't think Levi's done final thoughts first.
So, on an amusing note, for a very comedic bent of it, I think you could take Spaceballs as a very comedic space opera
Mm-hmm.
of like
that one
galactic
may be
stakes.
able. That one may be able to be done in a one shot.
Yeah. Right, and I feel like definitely for one shot you're gonna be like, all right, you're a politician from X. You're like have a couple of those, and like people pick those so that way they have some ties to some broader, somewhat dumb story.
Mm-hmm.
For a Spaceballs one shot, right?
Right.
The story's supposed to be dumb or it's not funny.
Yeah.
As funny.
Someone's got to get some extras. This, I don't know. Maybe this civilization runs on styrofoam or something. I don't know.
That's
Ooh.
hilarious. Actually.
Specifically, the packing peanuts.
Yeah, this civilization can only eat packing peanuts. They need the humans to make them more packing peanuts. Or maybe it's like a delicacy?
Peanuts, please.
My peanuts.
Or a drug for some specific species.
Yeah.
I'll start writing up the outline for that campaign.
Yeah.
Now we're turning humans not into just horn dogs, but drug dealers. Man.
They didn't mean to be. They just like
Yeah, we
shipped
never
over.
do that.
Here's your YouTube play button, but it came with packing peanuts, and they got hooked.
It's like, man, he's like, you got any more than peanuts?
The accidental street pharmacists.
Well, you know, when you're dealing with aliens, you hand them orange juice and they die. You have to start.
Yeah. Or water.
True.
Yeah, I'm
Fines.
sorry.
All right, Josh, what you got?
I will just end by saying I think it's really interesting going back to the. It almost feels like space opera is almost a default for RPGs in the sci-fi space. Like I think if you're going sci-fi, aliens or not, fantasy or not, just by nature, the elements of space opera that tend to be part of the genre lend themselves so well to tabletop role playing that where Levi mentioned earlier, like you just it's such an easy fit. I just see this as kind of the default for most people. Levi, I hope I'm not misrepresenting what you said earlier, but I just
Oh,
yeah. Go ahead.
no, I was gonna be like, yeah, no, I agree that like it can be hard not to space opera if you are in space.
If in space, will space opera? It's like an equation. I think that's because we're very used to high fantasy games, and the bigger the fantasy, well, then the fantasy's going to get bigger, and you are going to save the universe. So
There's an aspect of the mixture of role play and war gaming to make a tabletop RPG, which is big space battles, melodramatic.
Yeah,
It's effectively the seedlings of a TTRPG.
peanut butter and jelly.
Yeah.
I could see how it would entice a lot of people. I don't know if I'd go so far as to say default, but it definitely is enticing to people, enticing to the game.
When I say default, I just mean like you almost have to intentionally try not to be space opera.
Like stealth archers in Skyrim.
That is the default. I mean, why?
You don't have to.
Yeah, you sound like my wife now.
You don't have to, but then the
Stealth
question
is
is,
the
why
only
wouldn't
choice.
you?
Right.
Well, it happens on accident.
Why?
Right.
I'll tell you why you wouldn't.
Like,
Lightning. That's why.
Right. But like it happens so often.
ash.
you get there and you're like, oh, this is really efficient and fun. Of course, this is what I'm going to do with my life. Yeah.
I always tease that all my wife's characters have like quads the size of like giant rocks because just in a squat their entire existence.
Well, I mean, they look good from behind. That's all she can say. All right. What you got, Dan?
I'm gonna totally not specific to space opera, but I just wanted to shout out some of the other systems that Jacob from Avenue Studios had thrown out there that we hadn't mentioned yet. That certainly could play into this. One that we're really looking forward to is from Penny Dragon Games, Waystar. It's an epic D&D 5e sci-fi conversion that's looking really cool. We might have an actual play because we backed them, so we have access to their alpha test. I'm really excited to see how that goes. So far, the looks on that. So if you like 5e and you want to do sci-fi, Waystar is something to look into. He also wanted to shout out the Battle Lords, which I'm not as familiar with, but check out 23rd Century Productions, home of the Battle Lords. And then he threw out another cool idea is using the Starfinder lore, but in Suede, using the Savage Worlds more lethal play style with the Starfinder lore. Some really cool. So,
they keep
sci-fi.
saying it's more lethal. I keep watching Knights of New Seattle.
I know. You're right though. It's very swingy. That's what it should be.
Yeah.
And so far we've swung the player's direction for our game. So hopefully that karma doesn't come back to bite us by the end. We got
it's going to carry over to your next long game. That's what's happening.
Yeah.
You're all just going to be stuck in prison the whole time or something like that. You'll never get out of the Morrowind cell.
Yes. No worse, it's Arena. We're still in there. Anyways, yeah, so check out those systems. And especially, I love shouting out Patty Finn and Penny Dragon Games. They do a lot of 5e adjacent content. So check those out. And if you've played in it, let us know in the comments below, too. Love to hear how it's gone with those different systems.
Mm-hmm. All right. And I guess that leads to me before Scrat goes. So, let me see. For my final thought, those big space operas work really well. And you could use a few systems like we've talked about, Traveler, Open Legend, all those different types of things. Just think about what you want to accomplish with your particular one. And you can even do something more personal, like we talked about, where, yeah, there's one person who, like, to go back to Farscape, there's one person who has the main information, and they're the main character in some things. But just like with Farscape, you can mix up who's the focus of that particular episode at any time. Because this is something that, if you're doing a campaign, space operas lend themselves to campaigns. So if you're doing a campaign, you've got this space opera. Not everybody has to go down to the planet at the same time. Not everybody's doing the same thing on the planet at the same time. And with that being the case, you're splitting the party, but that's okay. Because assuming you're splitting the party, they're probably strong enough to handle a few things, and they're getting a bit beefier, barring any kind of nasty rolls. And it can set up some nice drama, and maybe this whole little snippet of the game doesn't even involve the main character of it, of the main overarching thing, because you're telling the individual stories that associate with that. If you're doing a more serious one, a lot of cogs and wheels have to go forward in like this political intrigue that leads up to battles, the strategy, the things like that. Going back to things like Gundam, there's strategy behind all of those operations. We don't see that as the viewer because they kind of cut that part out to get you. Well, we don't see that in like Gundam Wing. We see the action, the battle. And that's not something that is necessarily what you have to focus on at your table. In fact, you can have very different skill sets work together to accomplish something. I think this is like Powered by the Apocalypse, going back to that with this back and forth and scene cutting and stuff like that. That lends itself pretty well to the idea of the space opera with a flashback or something along that line. We talked about this with the court type of idea from one of our previous chats in High Magic. So having those things in your toolbox, because you don't have to do that just in Powered by the Apocalypse. There's nothing saying that you can't do a similar thing with other stories. With other systems, I should say, not stories. Because like in the middle of combat, if something really good happens, then that might have been something that you can flavor from having made a mental preparation or some other thing from the past, and you flash back to that to show the listener, the viewer, and yourselves and your friends that this is how this happened. And narrative games like that work really well for it. So you can do that in Open Legend. You can do that technically in 5e if you want to. It's your game. So don't be afraid to have important characters. Just let everybody have a part of this lead up. Be those supporting characters for whomever is the main character at this story arc, because it can change over time. All right, Scrat, what you got?
Honestly, not too much for this one. Turns out I guess I'm not a big old fan for space operas, but I can echo off, I think it was what you said about not being afraid to throw in a universal translator or give everybody the same language. We have a campaign going now where the players thought it would be a fantastic idea if they all had their language, like normal, but then they all picked up one other language and went to a bunch of places where one person got to be the spokesperson for the party because they had that language for where they were going. Well, it doesn't work. It's really clunky. And we're trying, they're trying, but it's just, man, it does not work as well as any of us had hoped. It's very clunky, very tiresome. Because, technically only one person's understanding is what's happening, and then they have to relay it back to everybody else, and it's a mess. One language is good.
Well, that's why, what was it? It was Spanish before, and then English and Spanish have kind of been... English, Spanish, and French have always been kind of vying for what's the universal language in real life. It's kind of English now. So, because you can go almost anywhere in the world and get by with English. So, it's the trade, it's the common of our current setting.
I'll say what I understand is English is the business language. That's what they learn for that.
Yep.
Trade tongue, common tongue, merchant's tongue.
There's some fun moments and scenarios that makes, but I feel like overall everybody would have been happier if we just had one language going through.
Yeah.
Well, to build off of that, a possibility, a tweak that someone could do with that if they want to use it in their game is have there be the universal translating language, but they could encounter an alien race that nobody understands. And so they have to build that up. And once it's built up, they can understand it. But then...
And if you want to take real life inspiration, if we have our universal language, but there are also local languages, there's a common thing that other people will feel more comfortable and trust someone more if they speak their language.
Right.
Yeah.
So even though it, like, you could still have that role of, like, I'm the spokesperson here because I'm gonna use something Pathfindery, like a +4 to talking to them, because they don't have to, like, feel like they're speaking formally. And if I took the time to learn this, I'd maybe have more of a connection to them, so I'm maybe more trustworthy.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean,
Marty's
and-
currently in jail, so their last spokesperson didn't do too good.
Yeah. And I'm not saying you should change your campaign, but if someone likes that idea you have and wants to run it in a game, this is a potential middle ground to keep that flavor, but without the persistent, constant hassle of it.
You could also do that with like local idioms that don't translate well to the common tongue, but that locals all know what that means, right?
Right.
But if you're picking up on, you're like, that raining cats and dogs out of context, if you don't know it like makes zero sense, right?
My favorite is I literally died, and we say that all the time.
But you're still
I
here,
didn't say that.
and so that's not a thing.
He's a ghost.
It's not how that works.
He
Say
got
it
better.
Well done. That's good though. Yeah.
Yep. All right. So working with the languages. Okie dokie. Let me see. I think that's what we've got for today.
Cool.
We're overtime. I knew we were going to be overtime. These sci-fi ones, man, they went long. So,
Everybody was
Fun to
excited
talk
for
about.
it. Yeah.
well, for you guys that have watched, you get a treat. We've already done the statement for this time, but you get a treat. Next is August. Augustine Illusions. And that is illusions, not illusions. Because we're gonna get weird. Stop on by to see how weird. And as always, have a great day. God bless and enjoy. Bye.
Bye.
This content was made possible by travelers and viewers like you. Thank you.
Adam has to do all the work, so
Start.
I'm having a great time.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Adam does all the work
Like, if I
for
had to-
these. I'll tell you what.
If I had to do the editing, I wouldn't be here.
Well, thankfully, these are just mainly cut the front off, cut the end off, and then I've got the middle that I do any kind of stuff it needs.
Like
Yeah.
mic drops and stuff, you know.
And
Important
I
things.
don't need them. You guys, I'm not doing any mic drops this next time. There's no mic drops in the space opera, okay? No mic drops in the space opera.
In space, nobody can hear you. Mic drop.
That's
Ooh,
good.
I like that.
Yeah. Should have
There
said
is no
that.
absolute down, so can you drop a mic?
Is there a mic drop after the fat lady sings? It is an opera, after all.
Yeah. Maybe
Only if
she
she's
drops.
using a mic, I guess.
She drops the mic. That's what it is. That's why it is. She does her finishing singing and then she drops the mic and breaks it. Now I know that's why there's nothing after the fat lady sings. It's all her fault.
That's true.
I'd listen to that opera in space.
Because there's no air disturbance, so he can't hear it.
Was it The Fifth Element that had like
Yes.
a space opera, like
Yes.
a literal space opera?
That was good, though. That song was good, and it was performed by a real person.
Yeah.
That was it. All
Is
right.
that the
And
one
then
where
you
she
cut a
had...
thingamabob. Out
Yeah.
of the...
She was blue,
She's
wasn't
spo-
she?
Yeah,
Yes.
multiple vocal cords or something like that.
That was the excuse they made in the
Right.
movie, but that actually was a person singing that. It wasn't
I
two
watched
people;
that
it was
for the-
a person.
I watched that for the first time in like the past few months.
Oh,
That's awesome,
congratulations!
Yeah.
I think I'd have been fine not watching it.
No, it's so funny. It's so
But
good.
now you know the meme, multipass.
Yeah.
Little
it was
Dallas
something.
multipass.
It's
It doesn't make sense, but it's not
No.
It's really not
It doesn't
supposed
have
to.
to.
It,
Yeah, it's a
not.
ride. That's what I always.
I felt like it was supposed to be 3 different stories or movies, and they just put it all together.
Well, it's basically like a 3-act thing, is what they did. It's just the acts feel real different. because you've got a lot of things happening. A lot of stuff happens very quickly in that movie. And like Dan said, it is a ride. You get on, you sit down, and you just go with it.
Just go for it.
Which is, I can enjoy those movies. I don't like movies that want to take me on a ride, but try to be more than just a ride movie. If you're gonna be a ride movie, if you're gonna be a popcorn movie, be a popcorn movie. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh man, you know that part at the beginning where the big alien dude he doesn't get through the door in
He's
time
too
and he
slow, yeah.
passes? Yeah, so me and my wife were watching it. It was both first time we'd ever seen it. And there was just this pause between us, and she was just like, you know, that fat tub of lard could have made it if he'd actually tried.
No, that was his life support suit. He needed it.
Oh, yeah.
If he'd got out of the life support suit, he couldn't have made it.
I absolutely love it.
Yeah.
Wasn't that Chris Tucker? Who was in there?
Chris
Rock.
Chris Rock, yeah. Ruby Rod.
Oh my god! I saw an interview where he was talking about that role. It was fascinating listening to him talk about it.
It's just
so outside,
over
his
the
normal-
top, everything.
Yeah, and he loved it. He's so glad he got that. It was a really great interview where he talked about it.
Everything in that movie's over the top, though.
It is.
I mean, except the main hero. He's not. Well, no, he's over the top in the action hero sense. So okay, everything's over the
It's
top.
Bruce Willis. What are you gonna do?
Yeah, it's like Die Hard in space.
Pretty much. Oh man.
All right, y'all ready to start this conversation on the space opera?
Sure.
Yes.
Yep.
All right, room tone.